Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 83. 83. We are moving finally into the 80s, and finally every event, every desk session, every output is finally firstly or progress. And I guess that's what I am. I don't really have a theme this week other than maybe just that. Part of what this has been for me, the desk sessions have been a way to sort of dig out inch by inch my rock hammer and dropping rocks down my pants into the yard, a la Andy Dufresne in The Shawshank Redemption. If I use the analogy, and if we've used the analogies, and I think that's why prison movies and any art and things like that, and universal themes and storytelling, this is why somehow, some way, the only theme really and I'm going to sound like I am bagging on stuff, but the only theme sort of a superhero is good triumphing over evil, which is a theme. But there are other themes, and the theme of Shawshank Redemption is hope will keep you alive in horrible circumstances. That liberation can come at literally chipping away at one pebble at a time. Friends can pull you over the line in the bleakest of days. An innocent man, if he keeps his soul intact, can survive. Corruption is also a failing. Like, there's a lot of themes in there, and some of them I'm sure were present on the front end of the storytelling when Stephen King sat to write that short story, and some are enlivened by the next iteration as a screenplay and then as a film. And then some, if I'm so bold as to not compare, but to understand that one of the happy accidents of anything you write and refine and work on is that unknown themes emerge from something that you weren't even aware of. And so when I think about my one-man show, there's a lot of like themes going directly into the cake, the eggs, the butter, the flour, but the icing and the decorating, the exterior, or the chemical reaction that makes a cake moist enough, or the chemical reaction that makes the cake tasty enough, or the way the perfect balance of sugar and the temperature, all of those things that make it that missing the chemical reaction, which will be explained as a chemical reaction, but in storytelling, and maybe in all things, who knows? I'm not here to discuss that theology, but all things, the act of chemistry, the act of God, the act of alchemy, the act of something coming together and something being transmitted inadvertently or contrary or beyond the consciousness of the writer or the filmmaker or even the actor, or even the blogger, or even the vlogger, or even and unintended consequences are the other side of that coin. So the happy accidents and the enrichment of the themes that were inadvertent or lucky, there are also unintended consequences, i.e. the mission statement of social media probably was not as bleak as it appears to be today. So the unintended consequences are, acts of will or acts of God, acts of the devil, if you believe that. It's always the balancing act of any endeavor. And so 83, I don't have anything for 83, although, I could probably pluck an album or two out of that, but then, nothing's popping, 83. And so we think about that. And also, you don't know, and maybe you do. Some of these writers are so brilliant. And this is where I struggle this week, and maybe continually. For example, you could do the movie Babe about a talking pig and a farmer, right? I haven't seen it, but I have sort of tangentially worked with Chris Noonan, who directed it, who was a bright guy. And he said that movie is about how an unprejudiced mind can change the world, and save lives. And that's a pig animated movie. It's not animated, but they animatronic a pig. And so that's what I'm talking about. That is someone who's conscious of the unintended consequences of a story, because the hook for the story was a talking pig, or a sort of a hearkening, or a challenge, or reworking, or treading on the similar territory of a Charlotte's Web or something like that. And maybe just making a fluffy confection, a comedy, a kid's movie that wouldn't destroy the morale of the parents that had to take them to the kids' movie. And that could be, I don't know, I'd have to look at the IMDb, but did he write the script, or was he strictly a director? And now, as I've been sort of in this sabbatical of mine, a lot of the filmmaking podcasts I'm listening to are, reminding me of things that I know about that are true, that there are 3 versions of everything. The one that is written, the one that is shot or performed, and then the one that is then edited if it's a film, or the one that is then released into the world if it were theater. So, a lot of those things emerge, and a lot of things become better in the process of completion, better in the process of collaboration, better in the process of that alchemy, that chemical reaction, that God act, that whatever you want to call it, that just sort of puts it there. And then in this day and age, and since I guess the printing press, commentary, critique, criticism, academic study, there are film majors, so you can graduate from a fine institution not having made a film, but having still majored in film studies. And that's, debatably important or not important, or debatably worth your money, or debatably whether it's going to exist. These things, and now there's some troubling information coming out of Syracuse, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what I'm saying. Some things are fondly remembered, and then that becomes the, how do I say it, that becomes the message could be misinterpreted and inferred by a critic, and then regurgitated over time, sort of how history can be reinterpreted, right? States' rights, or abolition, and we're going through a big growing pain, if you want to even call it that. A lot of people would call it a dismantling, and it might be that too. And again, I'm trying not to tread into this, but if I'm trying to adhere to nothing new under the sun, then, sadly, we've been here before, and will be again. And yet, what is it that will bind us, if there is anything, And so, as I think about unintended consequences and or happy accidents in storytelling, again, this vlog, pod, whatever I'm calling this channel, desk session, started as something and has mutated into something else. And yet, to go back to the Andy Dufresne chipping away at the wall to find escape, that is the theme I'm contemplating today, is liberating myself. I use the example there. There's very few sort of CGI-laden movies that I clamored to see, but many years ago, the first sort of reboot of Planet of the Apes with the Andy Serkis kind of adaptation, whatever production team that brought, I guess the James Franco reboot, those really made me clamor to see it. And then I would go back to work and joke with everybody. It's like, if you know the story and where it goes, the apes take over and the humans are then considered the subspecies. So, but we're going all the way back to origin story, which is kind of a cool use of the intellectual property, right? But so you know, and I know, you're wind up rooting for the demise of the human race, because the ultimate overriding theme of liberation, rebellion, and fighting back to the oppressor, that whole thing, the evil dog pound, or they're not a dog pound, they're chimpanzees, but the evil that was befitting the once the apes got smart, or at least one of them got real smart, right? Caesar. That evil, that is basically the same character, the guy who's prodding and torturing and getting sadistically enjoying the power dynamic over the chimpanzee. That's the same as the guy that Clancy Brown plays in Shawshank. And so we always, even in Shawshank, I guess Andy, the cop out, or the pressure valve, so that the oxygen tank doesn't explode, or that the way that we are skating freely in Shawshank is that Andy was innocent, right? Spoiler, sorry. But, it's so universal, the theme, that as long as you frame it a certain way, you're rooting for the bad guys, right? But they're all prisoners, and not all of them are innocent, just our lead. And so it's that idea of being mistreated, the idea that I don't care that eventually that sentient and intellectually superior chimpanzee will ultimately subjugate humans, that I'm rooting against my own kind. It's just that the storytelling is so powerful that we all relate and we all vicariously thrill from being the one that flew over the cuckoo's nest. You know what I mean? The one who broke out. And so, I don't know if things are, quote unquote, not as interesting because we've abandoned those archetypical storylines, or we're not aware of them, or we are not writing to those themes, or we've lost our fucking ability to concentrate, brain fog and things. And so, or that the commerce has made it impossible to tell compelling stories on those lines, or I think the scary part is that what AI promises to bring is that we've, the idea that we've tapped out human potential, that we'll never write another Jungle Land, or another Smells Like Teen Spirit, or another I Will Survive, or, that we've sort of like, there's 12 notes, you've heard that from A Star Is Born, there's 12 notes, as Sam Elliott just sort of says, Jackson used to always say that there's 12 notes, there's only 12 notes in music, and boy, you love what you did with those 12 notes. He did that whole thing. And infinity, I guess, is there's that many computations and combinations of those 12 notes, and then what key they're in and where they are on the staff and high, low, and all that stuff. Can you run out? That's the scary part of all of this stuff going on the grid, going on the matrix. And so I would submit that maybe there's a little fatigue, but I also think that, relying on classical structure, a lot of stuff is praised for breaking rules, but a lot of things forgot that they're not rules, but they are these guideposts that make things that make things stand up. And so you think you're watching a biopic or a loosely based on a true story about The Social Network, or, how Facebook came to be. And then you find out from scholarly study or from podcasts, there's a Cinephiles study, and a guy posited that it's really the almost a remake of Citizen Kane for the digital generation. And then you're like mind blown because it does track. But I think to go all the way back to the parable, or I think the biblical phrase of, what good does it do to profit profit to have the world and then to lose your soul. I'm butchering the actual quote because I'm not as up on that, but that could be baked into that cake too. But to go back to why prison films, which you would think is a genre, but ultimately isn't, because there aren't that many, and you can name them all. There's Papillon, Midnight Express, Shawshank Redemption, any of those sort of 60s, sex B-movie, women in prison movie genre. You have American Me, you have all that stuff, those prison things. Some of them aren't, some of them are nihilistic. Some of them are, it's so fucking bad and then it gets worse, There's Escape from Alcatraz. There's all that stuff. And why are you identifying with the wrongdoer? I think I've mentioned it before, and I have sort of checked Taylor Sheridan in one of those. I'm blanking on which one it is. I think it's the. I want to say it's 1883, not the 1923 one, but it's frontiers-ish, and the native or First Nation indigenous population that was, subjugated to Canadian reprogramming, probably here too, more that we were just decimating them and then quarantining them from popular culture, whatever happened there. I don't mean it to get that way, but the actress really impressed me because of the will to be free. And so all I'm saying is that, and you can tie it into, Bob Marley's, sort of last recording of Redemption song, I relate to this stuff. I don't understand. I know it's not for me, but the idea of emancipate yourself from mental slavery, right? Or why I'm talking about chipping away that we're on 83, which still might not even be halfway down the tunnel for what ultimately I'm after, which would be the exaltation of presenting my show, or the exaltation of a breakthrough in a casting, or the exaltation of a breakthrough in life. Finding a place, finding a feeling of freedom, that ultimately, and if I go back to that sort of moment I expressed last week, that I was going to get that acting job, that the exaltation was, I'm going to act on a professional stage and be paid. There's a payday. There's money going in the bank. I'm doing my best. There's something expected of me. All of these things represent versions of freedom. And then, so if freedom is your ultimate goal, and maybe I'm reverse engineering what should have been thought of, in my youth, but what's the most important thing to you? What's the, and obviously everything comes to a cratering halt if freedom is repressed, or if it's taken from you, or if, in many of our cases, some of my friends can relate, or people can relate, that sometimes it's you that is sort of your fear is a prison. And so that's what I mean, and that's what 83. I don't have a quippy movie that coincides. I don't know, if the Us Fest was in 83 or was it in 82. There's a famous Us festival that took place out in the desert. There's a lot of heavy metal, a lot of hard rock bands, and that's about all I can think about. But the point being is that every time I sit down to do this, and it may be a glorified procrastination. Maybe there's other things I need to do than sit here. I'm doing this on a day after I usually do it, because the Final Four and UConn making it through and things like that, and I can do that. And that would be a freedom that I am allowing myself, that the discipline that I so craved or needed, or was, that was enlivened in me even before Carnegie Mellon. I don't know where these quotes were from, but we were given these T-shirts at a summer thing I got to do at Oberlin College, a theater institute, like a summer program. And the T-shirt had a big, like, gray splotch. It was like rock and roll, punk rock. And it said, art isn't pretty, or theater isn't pretty, one of those things. And then the back said, discipline is freedom. And I think that was a Bertolt Brecht quote. And I dug that. I dug that. And I know that discipline is freedom is often echoed in the fitness space. It's often echoed in the self-improvement space, maybe even echoed in the manosphere or whatever, the optimizers, the David Goggins. And I do think I was lucky that sort of a rite of passage that's not built into, our culture via compulsory service like there is in other countries, or just in the way men were raised or even women were raised. I got a dose of an awakening, thankfully, based on the work ethic and ethos of the theater, which is often maligned as unpractical, impractical work, obviously inhabited by counterculture for sure, and of course the homophobia that the population may have toward the theater. But for me, theater has such a intense work ethic. An 8-show a week schedule on Broadway is next level energy. And what else are you doing if you're performing 8 shows a week? Which everybody says, I do 5 a week. I'm like, exactly. You do 5 shifts a week. 8 shows a week means there's two on Wednesday, 2 on Saturday or Sunday, one of those, and with 1 day off, Monday. And try working that into a whole thing. And they build in some lucky folks get vacations, and that's what the union is there for. But there is a work ethic that I think is true to the roots of why I was drawn to certain types of institutions. And I guess, not to bag on quote unquote the community, but it's not exemplified, at these award shows as what I know to be the heart of an actor, the patience, the training, the rage, the dealing with things, the disappointment. There's this carrying that mantle. And so again, when I had a therapist that once told me that, like, there is sort of a thing called narrative therapy where, and that's what appealed to me, was to change the story, right? So to change your trajectory of thought, or to change your why you're in therapy, what you're trying to work out. You can change the narrative by changing the narrative of your life, right? You could change how you see things, how you used to talk about this, that, or the other. You could see setbacks as they were growth, and maybe it's reprogramming. I'm sure that's true, and if programming didn't have a negative connotation, then we can't all be feral, raised by wolves, like nonverbal, Tarzans and Nels and whatever, those wolf boys. We just can't all. We don't know what really resides without some programming, right? And I guess that's where we're starting to, quote unquote, fall apart, if you believe that, because I think it should not be abdicated to certainly the internet is not a healthy place to program your brain, but that's what's happening. And that's why some of these fields of study, while not being vital, they don't keep sewer systems running, and they don't keep water supply clean. But then again, does a computer do any of that either? So these practical, I think we're forgetting that we are a world, that we are a community, that we are a country. And so everybody's saying that these fucking useless degrees, don't get a fucking useless degree, STEM. That's true. But not everybody has that ability. Not everybody has that yearning. Not everybody, and if we value we can agree that, clean water supply is more important than a production of Peer Gynt, for sure. But if you're fortunate enough to ply your trade, and that's why we need the best of the best, intention-wise, at these posts. And so also why some of the lessons taught in storytelling, taught in the narrative of the, Shakespeare, your Bible, all these things, these precepts, they're hard turns. Do you know what I mean? You can break the rules. The problem with like a lot of modern art, right? What we've come to find, Jackson Pollock and stuff. I don't know what he was doing before the paint splatter. I don't know what he was doing, and they looked pretty cool. And then they got this sort of inflated market where they were made to be valuable by commoditizing it. But someone like Picasso was a fine draftsman and could break the rules. There's fewer examples of that but there are some classically trained rock and roll people who, do know their rudiments and then can break the quote unquote rules. But if you're only entering sort of like punk rock and modern art kind of have an analogy because they were people who skipped proficiency for expression, right? So, and then in that, some exultant art came, i.e., maybe the Ramones and, maybe Basquiat, things like that, where you wouldn't do well in your figure drawing class, but you sold a lot of paintings and changed, quote unquote, the art world, and you couldn't even tune your guitar, or you couldn't even play anything but power chords, but you changed rock and roll. That's cool. I guess I went the classical training route where I haven't touched or been in the sniffing distance of a Shakespeare play except for pleasure reading and pleasure to say the words on my own time, and to respond vividly to something like Hamnet because of a hearkening. But that is in my quote unquote toolbox somewhere buried in there. And then I very seldom get to, show that all off. I guess a pilot gets from A to B is the first rule, right? Is takeoff and landing. So barrel rolling and doing what the Blue Angels do, that has to come from proficiency, but it's very seldom does a commercial pilot get to test those flying skills, right? And so, we've been I don't want to call it AI, but autopilot is a version of that. We've already had that occur, and we're okay with it. So, maybe it's always been a part of our lives, and it won't be the end. But unless we push back and unless we really want, I've seen too many comments where, because of poor behavior, in my opinion, but, I won't get into specifics, but because of less than flattering ad-libs from actors showing their ass, or the more you get to know about these people who forget themselves, there's almost this glee and this anticipation of AI is going to kill Hollywood anyway. And the fact that it's been mostly self-inflicted wounds, it really, really bothers me. And then it reminds me of that, art isn't pretty and discipline is freedom, and that summer in Oberlin where I finally made heads or tails of Shakespeare and really began to express myself and figure out, where my boundaries were in terms of what I, was willing to work at on my own time. Most of the stuff that I was praised for in school was stuff I did on my own, which is why I have to stick with this desk session, with this, with this process, and I have to find a way to liberate myself, because right now I'm not feeling very liberated. I am working on gratitudes, and I'm working on taking it in smaller increments of time and going to the gym. I'm doing a lot of the rudiments, but it's also time to play. It's time to go out there and rock, and have a concert, have a show, have an exalted moment, and to, everybody, wants to do the fucking Andy Dufresne, the cool hand Luke, you want that. I broke through the walls of this prison, and I am a holdout. I will still fight for that moment, to know what freedom feels like, And I the most overrated goddamn lyric that is quoted is "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." I don't know what the fuck that means. I never did. And I love lyrics because a lot of lyrics are used in like yearbook quotes, and like a lot of lyrics are, quotable, and but they're not real practical sometimes, and sometimes they're just inspirations and little thought blurbs. But I never understood that freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Yeah, I get what you mean, but I guess that means you're isn't that that could be nihilism is another word for nihilism is another word for nothing left to lose. And I understand that quote unquote, to go for it means you do it against prospects, you do it against you do it against conventional wisdom. I mean, my whole pursuit has been nothing left to lose kind of thing. And so I guess this week I've been struggling. Like I said, I had that audition experience this week, and then obviously you don't hear, and then that becomes its own sort of letdown. But I guess the process where they say freedom really manifests in your day is that you just send it off and you don't even remember it. Easier said than done, right? It's much easier to say make your life so great that that you don't even care. You just send these auditions and you forget about it. I mean, a lot of this stuff is nonsense talk, accepted as standard or accepted as deep, and or to be an actor you have to develop a thick skin. Okay, so here's a thick-skinned actor reacting to someone being shot next to you. There's oh no, you know what I mean? Your dog died. I have a thick skin. Oh well, right? That telling an actor to basically stifle the instrument, to not be reactive, to not show emotion, but and that's the fine line that's walked. And as things become strip mined, and as things we have to tell an actor to you stay in the moment, stay available to your turn on, I get it. I guess there's a way. I'm not trying to say be precious about your emotional dysregulation that helps you as an actor. I understand what they mean about thick skin, but it's if you have any the things that people are getting up in a flame about, and the fact that people are going in comments tells you that it's nobody we are admiring have a thick skin, and I don't understand. The idea, I think, is to still power through. The image I get is that Beast. Why do we love Beast Mode? Marshawn Lynch, like Beast Mode. Why do we love that dude? Is because maybe he felt every blow. Maybe he's hurting now. Maybe he suffered injuries. Maybe his career was curtailed. But we love him because that he was Rhino-like when he wouldn't go down. I don't know if this had much to do with the rest of my, high school or whatever. I know it was probably more like 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. I don't know if any of this reputation was built, but we would play on asphalt, like kill the guy with the ball, which is just like a Nerf ball, and we just run. It's like a version of rugby. We did it on asphalt, and it was always, you pitch it off and you run, and then you get tackled, and then you get put on the ground, and you give up the ball, or they try to wrest the ball from your grip. And it was the first time in my life where I understood that I could turn on a willfulness, and I could turn on some kind of aggression. And I remember I said, I'm not giving this fucking ball up. Fuck them. And I barreled around I dragged the pile. I got this sort of like Herculean kind of like, fuck you guys, and dragged them and wouldn't let it go, and then like held on to I'm not letting go, to a preposterous amount of sort of whatever was happening to me. I mean, this is gleefully probably before my knee injury. This was gleefully before things, your body was very resilient, and gleefully before that fear of hurting yourself peaked its head. I was in beast mode, and I just remember that it did sort of change the vibes around me in the hallways, like, all right, Carl D, and those are those rites of passage, those manly jockey things that have to happen or don't. And then you would think, why would that apply to my affinity for the hard work ethos of acting? It does. And I wish there were more ways for that image to be presented, as to what acting does. I know it's going to be a uphill battle in that regard. But I guess if there's a theme this week on the 83rd pod is to find your own emancipation, to free yourself. And that, that's what I'm clamoring for now that I feel like, to be honest, a little stuck. And so how am I going to power through this? How am I going to break through the pile and make it to the end zone, or to opening night, or to, what can I do? And what can I do to, free myself from digital shackles, or hang up shackles, or narrative shackles, and, maybe, this helps. I don't know. I hope it does to anyone watching. I know it does for me, just having this little bit of a, what you can imagine. This is the beauty of art, is like, they shot whatever, if they shot 60 days and they just gave you a glimmer of but if that were real, if that dude really did tunnel out, then the man hours involved that we don't see, that's why we get it. We're smarter than we think. Like, we understood that, like, because of the narrative, the narration, he dragged himself through all that, that great voiceover, shit water to get to freedom, a quarter of a mile or something like that. So you understand the lengths that people will go. It's why, while it's not for me per se, I was always moved by the Malcolm X story. Had nothing to do with, for most of his life and career, he thought I was a devil. But if you can't take some inspiration from the depths of the depravity he lived into the place he got to, and then you're not, really looking for, you're not looking for inspiration, honestly. And, and that's why we like Rocky, and that's why we like, and so if you can see yourself in all of that, and that's, I think, what I'll leave you with this, the Artemis ship is out there on the dark side of the moon, or getting to the dark side of the moon. Their commander is an African-American man, and And he said, probably better than I will, but I've been saying for a long time, I agree that activism should be present, because we should be embarrassed about that. We still have the first this, the first that. I think we should, as a collective consciousness, be embarrassed that we haven't had these breakthroughs, and that the fact that we're still saying the first this, the first that, is evidence of a problem at minimum, right? But I also believe that we are belaboring the strife part of it a little bit too much, to the detriment of the group. And so we need to move past it. And that's what he was saying, essentially, is, this has to be ultimately a human endeavor. We really have to get back to we're however, 6 humans in a capsule reaching the stars, that will go back to what Neil Armstrong said, one giant leap, and for one man, but for all mankind, right? Or one small step and one giant leap for mankind. We have to get back to that. Now that we have got those things checked off, we need to then just have at it after that, and be glad and celebrate, and ensure that there are chances for these firsts to happen. But it's pathetic that we have to belabor these points, in my opinion. The great 12th man, Brian Scalabrine, he goes out to these playgrounds and he crushes dudes because they want to mock him for being goofy and redheaded and being a scrub. Okay, and he goes, he says, I'm a lot closer to LeBron than you are to me, meaning I'm nowhere close to LeBron as a ball player, but I'm in the league that he plays in, and you don't even know how far away from the league you are, till you get on a court with me, or and then you find out. To me, I see human, I see exceptional, and we have to do that. So good on that commander in the Artemis. I bring that up because I won't go into the name, but the show I auditioned for is a space-related show, and while I don't enjoy necessarily sci-fi, I guess I was sort of into some of the more interpersonal space stories in my youth, even, space, that kind of thing. And so, I'll leave you with that. That's a human endeavor, and I'm glad he's up there and safe back. And now I sound like, Jingo Jango, but whatever. I get to say what I want here, and I have not prepared what is next on the list. I know last week, was it Eddie Money last week, or Too Young to Die? I think it was Jamiroquai, which I'll put in the, I'll put in the description later on here, and I will, I got to look up what's on the list next. So here come the specs. Nice. And we will look at the list quickly without too much we will play the next song on we won't play it, but we're going to mention the all-time list. Last week we were Too Young to Die. Yes. Okay, this one this is a song by Gabrielle called Dreams. And I think it's, I don't know much about the artist. I think it's a one-hit wonder. I think it's in the realm of dance track. I think it's in the realm of international dance hit. Dreams can come true, that kind of, and she has an alto voice. And I'll tell you where you hear this song most of the time is in a department store. Back in the day, I've heard this song many a time and it may have been where where I got the earworm to have it, because it's got a good hook and it's a mid-tempo dance track, and it's in line. It's in line with that Desiree song, You Gotta Be. It's again these mid to up tempo songs with brighter keys and inspiring lyrics that may be a little sing-songy and nursery rhymey, but they are mood elevators, and I have used them over the years, and now I'll tell you, the advent of some of the digitizing catalog is that I literally typed in the lyrics that I could remember to find this song, because I was, sometimes I do these little DJ sessions in my own room to space out. It's probably a form of meditation, and just it reminds me of the days we used to just spin CDs and shit. But I had to look up the song to find out it was Gabrielle, and Dreams is the name of the song, and it's one of those good, like, wake up in the morning and get yourself right and hit the streets and try to make something happen. And so we got Too Young to Die, which is a contrasting message to Dreams by Gabrielle, but Dreams by Gabrielle, check that out. I'll put the Jamiroquai on this description, and you'll see Dreams next week in the description. And peace. Let's try to break through the wall of the prisons that we create. Peace.